I would like to start by acknowledging and paying respect to the traditional custodians of the land on which we are speaking today. I recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. I pay my respects to the elders of the community and extend my recognition to their ancestors who have passed and all First Nation people who are watching. I acknowledge that I am on stolen land and that Aboriginal sovereignty has not been ceded. Always has been and always will be Aboriginal land. We have an Auslan interpreter tonight. If you require this service, please click on the top right-hand corner of Nick's video and pin their feed. My name is Alana and I use the pronouns she, her, and I'm the Western Australian Event Coordinator for Art for Australia. Art for Australia is a national, completely volunteer-run organisation that seeks to support and mentor aspiring LGBTQIA+ professionals. OFA's vision is to create an Australia where every aspiring LGBTQIA+ professional is confident to be their authentic self in workplaces that celebrate diversity and that are inclusive. Our mission is to provide visible mentors, role models, leadership and targeted support to aspiring LGBTQIA+ professionals and to strengthen their sense of community among professionals and students. This evening, the panel will be discussing their experiences as members of the greater LGBTQIA+ community. As a Western Australian, I'm excited to be having this discussion during Pride Month. We've had an interesting few weeks in Perth, and it seems especially important to be highlighting underrepresented voices in our community. You are seen, you are valid, and we support you. If you have a question for the panel, you can post your questions in the Zoom Q&A, the Zoom chat, or the Facebook Live comment section. Please note that on the Zoom chat, you can make your comments visible to all attendees or just visible to the panelists. I'm pleased to introduce our brilliant moderator, Ezra Dixon, who uses the pronouns they and them, works for the Victorian Public Service. As a transgender, neurodiverse, non-binary, queer and Jewish person, they are passionate about the overlap between queer and other identities, including in the workplace. Thank you so much for moderating this evening, Ezra.
Thank you so much, Alana. It's a pleasure to be here this evening, and it's a pleasure to be joined by so many wonderful panelists discussing all these important themes and really highlighting, as Alana has said, the plus in the LGBTQIA+, discussing those identities that maybe aren't as much the focus of mainstream dialogue focused on our community. It's a real pleasure to be here with everybody. Without further ado, I am going to introduce our panelists. So we have Giancarlo, who uses he and they pronouns, who identifies as non-binary, queer, pan and demisexual. They are Art for Australia's National Director of Community Partnerships. Giancarlo is also currently a Senior Policy Officer at People with Disability Australia and Secretary of the Australian GLBTI Multicultural Council, the two national peak bodies representing all people with disability and the LGBTQIA+, multicultural and multi-faith communities in Australia. Giancarlo is also the Operations Director for Democracy in Colour, Australia's only racial justice organisation committed to tackling structural racism in Australia. Joined by Giancarlo, we have MJ, who uses she, her and hers pronouns. MJ is the LGBTQIA+ subject matter specialist at APM Communities, a youth advisory council member at Origin, and the communications officer at Youth Pride Network. Her work ranges from sexual health live streams to being a D&D dungeon master for young LGBTIQA+ people. At work, MJ's passion lies in upskilling APM staff to provide LGBTQI+ sensitive services and safe spaces. She claims to be so out that she doesn't even own a closet, and credits a healthy dose of cynicism to studying politics and international relations in history at university. And finally, we have Alicia. Alicia is a comic and has performed across Australia, including at State Theatre Centre of WA, and has become a regular host and headline act of popular WA venues, including the Law Resort, Fremantle Comedy Factory, and Lazy Susan's Comedy Den. She has been dubbed King of the Lesbians and quite literally was born to stand out and stand up. One of her strengths, which is probably essential given the intimacy of the space, is that she actively interacts with the audience, revealingly honest and outspoken. That quote from Matt in Perth. And I myself, as has been mentioned, I am tuning in from the land of Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, here in Naarm, otherwise known as Melbourne, and I would like to add my acknowledgement of country to that already given this evening. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Giancarlo to provide the first of the speeches we will be hearing this evening, or enjoying this evening, before we move into a panel discussion. So thank you, Giancarlo. Please take it away.
Thank you, Ezra. I'd also like to echo my deep respect and passion for the land. I'm calling from the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, but earlier today I was actually on the land of the Darugara people in Blue Mountain, New South Wales. So it's been great to travel and be part and be nourished by the land of those three peoples. As Ezra mentioned, I do have a few labels that I identify with. I identify as disabled, identify as queer, identify as pan, and demisexual. I also identify as coming from a culturally diverse background and a faith background as well as being non-binary. So those identities make up some, but not all of my parts. I think the most exciting thing about having these identities has been the journey that has come to realize and accept these identities. These identities have come throughout my life, right from the beginning when I came out of the closet at the tender age of about 14. And it's been a progression to get to accepting those identities. I grew up in a world where there was little representation of queer people in the media, and there was definitely no representation of people who look like me in the media. And so the availability of real role models that I can look up to, identify with, and connect with, which just weren't there. And so that in part explains why the journey to accepting and now celebrating these identities has been one that's taken on a lifelong journey that I've been on since the age of 14. Those identities have been intersect with my experiences of racism, with ableism, as well as my own privilege, and it's through that intersectionality of those identities have I come to acknowledge and celebrate them, because for a long time those identities kept me not accepting those identities kept me oppressed. But now that I'm accepting them, it's allowed me to really recognize the value and the strength and the vulnerability that comes from being from such a diverse background. So one of the questions I've been asked to talk to you about is how these identities have played out in my work and what decided me to take the step. That's a really interesting question for me, because the question around coming out, both at work and also in my day-to-day life, wasn't really a matter of discussion for me. I remember when I first came out, and I've had multiple coming outs, it wasn't a question of like, will you accept me? It was a question of like, I'm here and I'm not going to go anywhere. And I love what MJ said in the bio where they said that they're so queer they have no closet, and I really resonate with that idea because at the end of the day, we don't need to be defined by what we are and be and need to come out of a closet. And I really took that attitude earlier on. So my coming out was very much flipped. I very much just decided that this is who I was, and it was on you, the person who who was interacting with me, to say then decide whether or not you accept this or not. And if you don't accept it, then I have no time for you in my life. And so that approach, whether it be arrogance or whether it be a defense mechanism, helped me really come to terms with it. But what I wasn't prepared for was as I said, the progression of realizing and accepting differing identities. And so that for me is very much intertwined with the conversation and how the conversation has changed in the last decade. I came out in 2003. That's nearly 20 years ago. And that for me means a lot, because a lot has changed since 2003. The conversation around gender identity is new. The conversation around disability inclusion is something relatively new. These conversations are alive, and these conversations are growing, and that's fed into my identity and how I understand and appreciate my identities, and how I then come out subsequently with those identities. As I said earlier, there was no available resources for me to understand my own experiences. It's only through the representation and the visibility of these different identities have I been able to see myself reflected back And for that reason, one of the most important things to me is being visible. And this is the reason why I'm here today. So it leads me to the last question that I want to talk to you about, and that is, how do you find your community? I think the first thing to do is to find yourself. You can't get back to a community before you accept and find who you are. Once you've done that, I think the second thing to do is to start talking to people. Out for Australia is a fantastic community. There's many other organisations that exist to support people. There's also organisations that don't exist, and that's because the community isn't there. So people like them haven't come together. So that's another reason why I should talk to other people. We can connect with people more than we have 20 years ago, and so I think it's on ourselves and each other to reach out to people. And if there is no community, then definitely connect with each other and form that community yourself. I really found that an important thing where being connected to the Sydney Queer Disability community, there wasn't a community. And even right now, the conversation on how do we connect queers and disabled folks together is a live one. And there's no real national sense of cohesion in what we need and what we want for ourselves. And so we're talking to each other. And so when you find your community, that's how you can. You can only find your community when you find yourself. And once you do, the next step is to start talking, and finding spaces like this is very much the next step after finding who you are. So hopefully some of this has been I don't know what the word is. I was going to say instructive, but it was more has been helpful. If I guess is the word I'm looking for. Hopefully some of this has been helpful. I don't claim to think I've got all the answers. I don't claim to think that I represent all the answers I have, but I do know that my journey has been one that has only come from being open to different identities, and then educating and educating yourself and being open to that education to then see if that reflects you. And if you can do that well, then that is what celebrating the plus means. So thank you so much, Ezra. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Giancarlo. There was so much in there that I know resonated with me personally as a person who holds multiple identities. And I know that will probably resonate for many of our panelists this evening, as I'm sure for many attendees. And I completely agree with you that knowing yourself is a really important first step, and being confident in yourself and sure in your identity, but that you can't hold that in isolation, that community is such a powerful source of support, strength, and growth. So thank you so much for sharing that. I know that I was definitely informed and inspired by what you had to say this evening. Without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to MJ to speak. MJ, take it away.
There we go. Howdy, y'all. I'm MJ. In my particular case, seconding the acknowledgement of country, I am located in Wajak Noongarland, in Perth, also known as Bolu, in the traditional language. And I think it's been said a fair few times now, but Giancarlo absolutely knocked that out of the park. So much of that resonated. And it's going to be fun coming up with my own ideas on what to speak about. So that people know, I'm MJ, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify on the asexual spectrum, the aromantic spectrum. I identify as queer. I am also transgender. And then when people specifically ask me to identify my sexuality, I unironically would use the term no thank you. I have this very complex, I think you can tell from the way I'm talking about it already, relationship with sexuality and romantic identity. And it's something that I don't see a whole lot. And I know that as a community and as communities, we're starting to cover this. We're starting to discuss all these labels and micro labels and that are just to describe experiences, and they're fantastic. But one day I'll find one that specifically resonates with me. But in the meantime, it's sort of like I fit under the umbrellas rather than fitting the words themselves. So that's why I'm very specific about identifying under the ACE and ARO spectrums rather than just saying I'm ACE or I'm ARO, because it's a lot more complex than that. And as individuals, we all have these incredibly complex experiences. And honestly, I haven't worked out entirely what mine is yet. I just know that I have a unique experience to me that is, you know, that maybe others have and will use different language for, or maybe I'm entirely alone. And ultimately, the point of that is just being able to find community that I myself and others in my experience can settle for, who can feel at home with, who don't have to explain and defend that time after time after time. Because when it comes to these intersections of identity, it's a tricky place. I mean, in the bisexual plus communities, there's often this discussion of, do I like this person or do I want to be them? And once you're trans, when you're trans, that question goes up a difficulty level, because it's like, do I want to be them? And if so, oh dear God, that's a whole other kettle of fish that I've got to open and deal with. And it's a scary thing. And luckily I am past that stage, but it's like now, like, do I even like people? Because as a general rule, not really big on romantic or sexual feelings towards people. I could probably count it on one hand. And even then I can't say, well, that was because, you know, I wanted to be that person, or I actually liked that person. And this is what I mean by this is so complex. It's hard to describe because my experiences and my feelings are so foreign, and they exist in a world that has, I guess, a lot of discrimination in it that has prevented us and our identities from being seen as mainstream and having widespread language use around them, that it becomes difficult to say, okay, given these experiences I've had, I identify with this. And then it gets even worse once you sort of start to consider things like kink and BDSM and other intersections of people's identities that aren't inherently sexual, but people often assume to be sexual. And describing that is, again, another kettle of fish, because it's not only do you struggle to describe yourself, but you struggle to have that conversation with others about other intersections of your identity. And it's it can be a bit of a nightmare. And that's sort of why I say I have no closet, partially because I don't have a closet, but also because I can't afford to have a closet, because if I did, I would have to explain so often about my identity. And I'm past that. I'm past justifying myself. I'm happy to talk about it if someone's got like 20 minutes, but you know, it's explaining myself. I think we're all beyond that at this point. Otherwise, I think I've covered everything. I wrote down a couple of things. I guess my final statement would be that I just think it's really, really important that when we're talking about LGBTIQA plus people, we include the I, the Q, the A, the P, etc. Because seeing that, even if it's not perfect representation, it's better than nothing. It makes us feel seen. So with that, I'm going to pass back to Ezra. Hope that made sense.
Thank you so much. It did. And everything you said about the nuance and the complexity of identity, it's good that I had my camera off, because I was sort of jumping up and down in my chair going, oh my gosh, someone said it. You've hit the nail on the head. Thank you so much. And again, about that the challenges of dialogue, where it's great to have a conversation about it sometimes, but having to take people on a crash course of identity can be pretty exhausting. And those spaces, it's very nuanced, sometimes trying to define the differences, but it's our space to define. So thank you so much. There was, again, so much in that really, really resonated with me. I'm getting very excited for our panel discussion, folks. I hope everyone else is too. Without further ado, I'm going to stop talking again. I'm going to hand over to Alicia. Again, please take it away.
Hello. Hi, I'm Alicia. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking on the land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I want to pay my respects to the elders present and emerging and past. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Cool. Just wanted to get that as well. Just wanted to say that at the beginning. Because I'm also in Perth. Yeah, so tell you guys a little bit about me. My name is Alicia. I'm a comic. I'm a comedian. Like, that's my main thing. That's what I usually do. So coming out for me has been a little bit different to a lot of other people, I think. Also, I identify as she, her as well. I'm also an intersex person. And that's what I do some of my comedy about as well, because I feel like we don't talk about intersex people very much. Just like the past speaker before me said, like, a lot of people don't include the, you know, they go LGBTQ and they don't add everything else on the end there. So that's definitely what I try and do in my day-to-day life, is bring that up and talk about it. How I came to acknowledge my identity was really quite difficult, because for me, like, I always knew I was like gay. I always knew I was queer, and coming out was kind of fine. I was like, I like women, ha ha ha, which was like fun. Which is all good. But I definitely suppressed the intersex part about my identity for a very long time. Like, I just pretended it wasn't there, because I think the reason I pretended it, it just wasn't an issue. Like, I just pretended because, like, a lot of intersex people can agree that sometimes it's easier just to not talk about it in a way, because I found it easier to not talk about being intersex, because I find whenever I do, people will just automatically be like, oh yeah, what's your genitalia? Like, that's just that's the immediate reaction. You don't even have to, like, you just start saying it and that's the reaction out of people. So that's kind of why it took me a long time to accept my own identity and start talking about it on stage. Because, like, when I came out to my family, they were just at a comedy show and I was just doing a bit. I was just doing a joke and I was like, haha, things. Yeah. So I was trying not to swear. Yeah, so it's weird. And then when I want to come out as intersex, like, telling that to a room full of people, then having a room full of people be like, do you have a penis? It's weird. But I feel like that's, you know, I feel like not many other people are talking about it. So that's just kind of why I'm trying to talk about it a little bit more. Oh, so I've just got some questions up here that I want to just, like, touch on. I found, like, definitely coming out in a workplace as well. Like, I haven't even still told a lot of people at my day job. They don't know. Personally, if they ask, I'll tell them, but I don't see the point. I don't see why it changes anything. And I just haven't really found the time to really, because I don't really like any of them as well. So why do they need to know? Why do they need to know? But I found with meeting, like, my community as well, the more I've kind of been myself, because sometimes I feel like I'm only my true authentic self when I'm able to talk about being intersex, when I'm able to talk about being queer. So sometimes how I meet my community is usually what will end up happening is I'll do a big passionate comedy set about being intersex and queer and things like that. And then usually people come up to me after the show and be like, haha, that was very funny. Let's be friends. And that's kind of how I've met and made my own little community. And it's been really lovely. And that's a really kind of a fun way I've met the LGBTQ community for me. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Hey, but I don't know. I just find being intersex, it's weird because there's this big idea of intersex people that they've got like a very masculine body and boobs and long hair and a penis, and it's like, oh, that's not. No, don't just that's actually just Greg from accounting. He's such a cool dude. Stop sexualizing him. I don't know, that's just how I feel about intersex stuff. But yeah, that's my talk. I'll hand it back to Ezra. There you go. Yeah. Pew pew.
Thank you so much. I'm going to just very quickly respond to you. Thank you so much, Alicia, for sharing your experiences in a wonderfully beautiful and comic way. I can see why you are doing so well in that profession. You had me, I'd say, rolling around in the aisles laughing, but there's not that much space here. Thank you so much as well for highlighting the experiences of a part of our community that even within the dialogue that steps outside the L, the G, B, and even the T, that is often not talked about. So thank you so much for that. I'm very briefly going to hand over to Alana again. So Alana, over to you.
Just want to echo everything that Ezra said. Thank you everyone for being so open about your experiences. Ezra is actually going to tell us a little bit about their experience, and then we're going to go on to some Q&A, I believe. So Ezra, again, back over to you.
Thank you. We are playing hopscotch this evening. It's a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Alana, for giving me the opportunity to share my experiences as well. I was really, really inspired by this evening's speeches, and I just wanted to have the opportunity to talk a little bit myself about my own experiences. So as I think has been previously mentioned, I hold a few identities myself. I am transgender, non-binary, queer. One that wasn't, I don't believe, mentioned was, and that was my oversight, not writing my bio clearly enough, is ace, neurodiverse, I have ADHD, and Jewish. I'm also obviously not from Australia, so I am an immigrant and a settler, first generation. So there's a definite concoction of identities that sort of live within me. And one of the things that I was reflecting on this evening was that holding multiple identities, none of them exist in isolation. No human is an island and no identity is an island, it seems as well, although I would very much like to be Ibiza. In that, nuance is definitely key. I know, reflecting on, for instance, my Jewish journey, as I convert, even though my family is Jewish, I am converting back as an adult, having not been raised Jewish. I've been asked on multiple occasions how I keep my LGBTQIA+ identities, my neurodiverse identities, and my Jewish identity clearly separate. And the simple answer is that I don't. I experience my faith and my culture through the lens of those identities. I don't relate in the same way to stories that I hear in synagogue as a young, cis, straight, white male doing his bar mitzvah might. And that's okay. Each of those experiences are unique and should be taken as is and understood and trusted and validated. But it's implausible to expect that my experience of my faith and my culture will be the same just because I should be able to set those to one side. The other thing that I think is really, really important and impactful for me in my journey has been the notion that discovering one's own identity in any sense, and in multiple senses indeed, is all the harder when there's no frame of reference or touchstone. Growing up, I didn't really know about any of the letters of the acronym until I was, into my teens. And when I started identifying as a gay man, because that was the first letter that I really came across. And it wasn't until later that I really got to understand what being trans and being non-binary was. I didn't discover being non-binary until I think I was 25. And obviously, until that point, the language I'd had, even around gender diversity, didn't reflect my experience to the point where me, in all of my obtuseness and unwillingness to acknowledge things that were staring me in the face, was able to acknowledge that that was a space which I belonged to. By the same token, I didn't realize I had ADHD until this year. I thought that everybody struggled with procrastination, inattention, and difficulty focusing on tasks. It turns out most people don't struggle as much as I do. I was quite surprised by that, and it made a lot of sense of a lot of things. But again, I grew up in a world, and we all grew up in a world, that doesn't talk about how different people experience learning, education, and the workplace differently. And that was a huge barrier. Having an understanding that the world is seen through different eyes and different lenses, or is experienced through different lenses, I should say, apologies, is crucial to being able to frame a nuanced understanding of identity. We aren't all the same, and nor should we be, because that would be quite dull. And as such, it's important that we frame our language and frame our conversations, and indeed frame our dialogue as a society around the notion of nuance. I'm aware that, particularly having watched the news cycle for the last, 9 months, that's been lost in many senses, but one can only hope. The other challenge that I really think about is that holding identities, particularly multiple identities, in the face of a world that doesn't get it is a daily challenge and indeed a daily victory. Having to negotiate everything from the questions about how do you have a partner but you're ace, like how does that work, to those uncomfortable negotiations and assessments about bathrooms, at least when I was going out into spaces regularly that had bathrooms that weren't my house. I will acknowledge that one of the silver linings of the last 9 months is that my workplace has had a gender neutral bathroom and a dog and my fridge. But then also to being able to explain the differences between my neurodiversity and the small, slight shades of grey that exist in neurotypical experiences of the world that reflect maybe in some small manner a neurodiverse experience, but are not quite the same. And the other thought that I have, just to wrap things up, is that the metaphor that comes to mind is that even once you've done your Duolingo course on your identity, once you have the language and the vocabulary and you've passed all the levels and got all the stars, I think it's stars in Duolingo, you continually have to face the challenge of nobody else having taken the same course. So instead, you have to translate through the most rudimentary of dictionaries to be able to make people connect with what you're trying to say, and that doesn't always work, and sometimes the gap can be too wide, the gulf can be too wide. That being said, I do, as has been mentioned before this evening, love talking about identity. I love nerding out about it. My favorite things to nerd out about are LGBTQIA+ identity, neurodiverse identity, multicultural and multi-faith identity, and computer games, in no particular order. So when I get to connect with someone that likes to talk about those things, it's a fantastic time. What I would love to be able to do is to be able to nerd out quietly and peacefully and vocally all at the same time, if that makes sense, without that being seen as odd or strange. My identity is just as exciting to talk about as the identity of a politician with a 35-year career who is standing for office, who ticks all the boxes of privilege. I'm interesting too, not just presidential candidates. With that all said, I'm going to stop ad-libbing now, and we are going to jump into a panel discussion. So I'll get all our panelists to turn their cameras back on, and we will jump into some questions. Now, we've had a few pre-prepared questions that we'll run through, but there's also been a couple of questions submitted through the pre-registration through Zoom, for those attending by Zoom. If anyone would like to ask a question during the course of the evening, we would love to hear from you. This is, after all, meant to be a dialogue and an interactive and engaging experience. So please feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A function, and we will try and get to as many as we can. You're also welcome to put questions in the chat. So I'm going to pick a question, figuratively speaking, out of a digital hat. And I think I'm going to start with, I should have picked this before I started looking. Oh, here's a good one. What would you tell your younger self about celebrating yourself? And Giancarlo, you touched on this during your speech, so I think I might come to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, Ezra. I did touch on it, didn't I? I think the thing that I would say, I know the thing that I would say to myself is don't be defined by anything. If anything, everything I've learned from my journey thus far has been the limit of language, and we've kind of touched on the idea of dialogue and the lack of language, and the limit of language definitely limits how you think and perceive yourself, and how you connect with others around you. So I would say to my younger self, screw that, screw language, just be comfortable with who you are, and the sooner you do that, the more comfortable you'll be. But it's hard because obviously, as you know, as teenagers, as young people, you just want to fit in, and I get that. But I also think, even thinking back to when I was younger, one thing that always was really easy was to accept the fact that people respected you when they knew who you were. Like, I talked about my story when I first came out, and I said it was on them to decide to accept me or not. And when that's my partner's phone. Sorry. When I said to you earlier that it was when was on them to decide whether or not they would accept me who they are. And the funny thing about that coming out story was that they just kind of accepted me who I was, and they ended up loving who I was. And so it was a good coming out story. And so, but it goes back to what I was saying about accepting, about not being defined by your limits, by the limits of language, because and just being comfortable with who you are. If I had done that, and like with my first coming out experience, that would just mean that people won't question it. And I know that's never an experience, but it was my experience, and I found like it worked for me. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Thank you, GC. And as you'll all notice, this is indeed a live show, so these things happen. But thank you. So well answered. MJ or Alicia, any thoughts right on this one?
Alicia, sorry.
No. Oh, no, after you.
I was just going to say that I thought you were reaching for the mic, so I was going to give you this one. So you're good to go.
No. I actually think you should go. I actually think you should go. Yeah.
It really is live. I guess for me, I feel like it's too late for my younger self. I think if I got to go back and talk to her, she'd be stuck in her ways. And so I'd rather, I guess, address other people who are in maybe the position that my younger self was. The confidence is a thing, even if you're faking it. Because the second you can reject or try to reject, there's just something so empowering about that. And I haven't specified what that thing is, but just rejecting anything in that space can really empower you and give you this confidence and set you on a path towards identity that you might not have had otherwise. And if you don't do that, that's a-okay. It's not a character flaw. However you do things is however you're going to do things. There's no necessary right or wrong way. There's the way that you're doing, and that's the way that's going to happen. And ultimately, whatever you'd like that to be, if you can get that, that would be excellent. Alicia?
Yeah, you bring up some really great points, MJ. Like if I was to like tell anything specifically to my younger self, it would probably be to maybe chill out a little more. I think I think I really built it up a little bit, maybe too much. I'm personally very dramatic. I've always been that way. I've always been really high energy. So I've always just really been a lot. So I think if I maybe just like took a few more minutes and, you know, maybe like just slowed down a little bit, I think I could have really, maybe made some better decisions. I think, I really wish I did slow down a little bit, but also it's also surprising for me being an intersex person, how many people don't care that much. Like I always assumed people would maybe be like really would hate me. I just had that in my head for so long. And I think that's sometimes because of like political things, for no one's certain name, but someone Baz. Anyway, like, you know, I think mostly because of like leader and like the fact that when I was young, gay marriage wasn't 100% legal. So in my mind, I was just like, it's wrong. Yeah, so maybe I think if I was to tell myself anything when I was younger, it would just be like to chill out a little more. Maybe don't take like everything so seriously. And people are actually quite nice if you're just being yourself. Thanks.
Thank you, Alicia. Both of you, or all of you again, said things that really, really resonated with me. I know if I was to go back and have a chat with my younger self, that'd be strong words. I'd have to really struggle to restrain myself. But I also acknowledge that younger me went through knocks and bruises to get to where I am now. And that while I don't think that there's anything that says that queer people should have to go through knocks and bruises to figure out who they are, unfortunately, that is the path that I've been on. I think if I was to communicate one thing to my younger self is that if you think you're going to have everything figured out in the next 2 years, you're kidding. Like, come on. I'm not going to have it figured out by the time I hit 30. I doubt I'll have it figured out by the time I hit 60. And I'm starting to learn to love that process. Identity and experience are ongoing journeys. I am going to jump into another question. Again, just to remind you, I'm more than welcome to pop questions in the chat or in the Q&A. We would love to hear from you. But just looking at the questions we have here, the intersectionality of racism, sexism, classism, and ableism can be felt more keenly in some workplaces and industries than in others. Do you have any reflections on the multiple barriers you have faced due to the intersectional facets of your identity? And I want to just note that obviously those are some very powerful intersections there listed, but you please feel free to talk about other intersections that aren't listed there, as there are many. I'm happy to open it up to anyone who wishes to go first.
Yeah, I totally can. So with, like, especially in comedy, I find, especially because that's my workplace. So there's a lot of time I'm battling just to not only be the only woman on the lineup, you know, let alone the only gay person or the only person it's a weird situation, because I find a lot of the time, like, the only times I'll be asked to do a show by certain companies is if they're doing their like yearly queer show, and it's awesome that I can go do these shows, but it's like, cool, I'll see you next year at the same time. So I find like, personally for my industry, it's very male dominated, and even like the opportunities of me talking about my intersex thing, it's not a thing, it's just my life, love it. And when I start talking about being intersex on stage, it immediately, I find a lot of rooms are like, oh, that's too intense, let's not. If I'm gonna book you, let's not do that routine. And it's like, okay, well, you're asking me to specifically not be me, is what you're asking me. You're asking me to not be myself and to completely not talk about that, which and it sucks because I also need money and to eat, so it's like, it's a weird, yes, but I feel like in a lot of workplaces it's gonna be, anyway, that's just my experience, but not a great one, but hey, I'm doing really well, so
Definitely are, Alicia. And I'd love to just jump in on the point, because I wanted to flip it a bit and talk about, the fact that the responsibility is on the workplace and not us with intersex identities. When we think about diversity and inclusion in the workplace, it's seen as like, here's our our first people action plan, here's a different inclusion plan, here's this plan, here's that plan. That's great, obviously. It's good to have a plan, but we don't fit into one thing over another. And all of us on this panel today have explained how we have intersex identities, and that is so important for the workplace to recognise and acknowledge that. You can't do gender without looking at racism. You can't do disability without looking at sexuality. Like, it's like, and so on and so forth. They all intersect and overlap, and there's this beautiful mess. And so the sooner a workplace gets that sorted out, then the easier it is for everyone to be who they are. And I've luckily have not had too many bad experiences, because I've been very clear on what I need. I'm a legally trained person who can assert my legal rights, and I can put my lawyer hat if I want to. But not everyone does, and that's the reason why I go back to my earlier point, that you have to make sure the workplace understands their responsibility. And that's really the only message that I want to say on the point, because that is where it starts and ends. It's a legal right too. It's a legal thing too. It's not like these diversity characteristics are not protected. So it's an obligation on the employer to do so legally as well, on discrimination law.
Thank you, Juicy. And for anybody who is facing challenges in the workplace, please, we really do encourage you to take the opportunity to look up resources online in your area. There are always supports out there for all of us, and it's definitely important that you assert and pursue your legal rights. Not just ultimately, obviously, because you deserve it, but not just because of that, but because we all need to make sure we're, as much as we are able and are in a position to feel comfortable and safe to do so, pursuing progress, pursuing change, and pursuing a dialogue where these rights are recognised and upheld. MJ, would you like to jump in before we move on?
No, I think everyone's covered things, and I'm not going to be able to say anything without straying into the other questions and spoiling them. So
sounds good. I will stray us all into the other questions so we can begin spoiling them now. There's a great question here that really stands out to me. Are there any assumptions or falsehoods you've heard about people that share your identity that you'd like to take this moment to correct?
Oof. Where to start? Where to start? Someone should start. No, I can. Yeah, so many. Like, I find, with me being intersex, I find the biggest one is people will just come up to me and be like, "So you have a penis and a vagina?" And like that is what, like, it's okay, it's not in any way wrong, okay? And sometimes, like, intersex people do have a penis and a vagina, and that's amazing. But to assume that every intersex person does, like, it would take 10 minutes, Google it, and you have your answer. Also, if you were listening to, like, me do the performance anyway, you wouldn't have to, anyway. But I find that's a really big one. Like, that's one that I get at every show that I've done about me being intersex, easily, every one. I also find, I'd say, like, that's I'm just gonna touch on that one. Yeah, that's one I get every time.
Fair enough. I'm very glad you said that, because I was really hoping you would speak up, particularly in relation to the challenges and misconceptions that the intersex community faces, because as I've noted before, it's one that's not even spoken about within our wider community. So thank you for sharing, and so comically and beautifully as well, and for dismissing that misconception. And I encourage everyone here this evening to go away and do more research. It's an ongoing project that I am researching and educating myself about, and I think we all should. Giancarlo or MJ, feel free to jump on in.
I think I'll make my way through my identities really quickly. In terms of being trans, and I know this is more about the plus, it's the idea of best of both worlds. And it's like, no, we don't necessarily use what we've got, and we don't necessarily have those things. Like, no, stop it. In terms of being queer, the idea to particularly cis men that I exist to call them slurs is really common. So I've had a lot of situations where cis gay men will go, "Oh, you, by using the term queer, are oppressing me as a gay man. You're calling me queer." And it's like, whoa, no, I'm using it for myself. Like, it gets really scary because there is that privilege there. That in the cis experience, the cis-perience, there's a joke in there somewhere. In terms of being ace and aro, this one's really simple, but the idea of not being able to enjoy sex, or not being able to have some kind of feelings towards someone, or not being able to engage in certain behaviors when it comes to what people would consider sexual. It's, no, I'm pretty happy, thanks. I'll do whatever I sort of like in my bedroom, whether that's sleeping or the other stuff or other stuff on top of that. Like, this idea that my life must be so sad because, you know, oh, you're asexual, you must have no one. It's like, no, I'm pretty happy with my partner, thanks. Like, you know, it's it's a whole thing. Giancarlo?
No, I think I'll jump on the ace bandwagon quickly because I think it's like it's yeah, it's very black and white, right? Like, and I identify as demisexual, and like that. And for those who don't know, that's someone who feels sexual attraction to people they have a strong emotional connection to. Yeah, so but I enjoy all those things. It doesn't like, and that's why I use the word demi as opposed to ace, because of that whole idea that's like, oh, you don't do sex. I'm like, no. It just means I want to do it in when I've got a strong connection to someone. But that's one of the things I want to just to add my voice to. Like, ace does not mean no sex. The second thing is disability. For me, it's kind of like what I'm a bit like Ezra, where Ezra's journey with being identifying as neurodivergent and ADHD has it's similar with me. Like, it's I've identified with my psychodisability more in the last few years because of the fact that disability is all about extensively focused on visible disabilities, and so mine is very much invisible, and a lot of the times it becomes really frustrating when disability is focused on the cis white het man in a wheelchair, because that's really accessible to everyone, and people get that. But that completely discounts the fact that I've had to take in combination about 2 years off from working in my life because of my disability. That's a lot. 2 weeks is a lot by most people's standards, actually. Like, if you ever go see a doctor, if you're out of work for 2 weeks, that's enough to be considered as something that's being have a debilitating and disabling effect on your life. And so for me, just because I don't look like I have a disability, you can't make assumptions around what it means to be disabled, and that goes about everything in general, really. You can't make assumptions of what identity means to someone, and it's about trying to have the conversation respectfully and with an open mind.
Thank you. Again, all of everything you were saying, I've been sitting here just nodding to myself because I think we've got a lot of shared experiences on this panel, and so much that has been said reflects my own experiences. One, I think, just to sort of add in something a little bit different, is around bathrooms. I've had very well-meaning people in my life. This was obviously back when I was allowed to leave the house for extended periods of time and interact with large numbers of people, which is starting to happen again. That, oh, you can use the woman's bathroom, that's fine, thank you. I'm glad that you feel safe with me in there. That's not the point, at least not entirely. I don't identify as a woman. I would rather have a bathroom that I feel safe going into. And then, of course, the flip side conversation of, why don't you use the men's bathroom? It's just a bathroom. I'm like, yeah, but people make an assumption about me when I walk into either of those rooms that isn't accurate or correct. I'm not saying take away gendered bathrooms from people. Growing up, having a connection to Judaism, I can definitely say that gendered bathrooms and gendered spaces are important for people for very many reasons. It's not an either or. It's not a zero-sum conversation. It's about adding in to that space. And then again, touching on neurodiversity and disability, yes, things like ADHD look quite a bit like having a bad day at work. The difference between a bad day at work and ADHD is you don't need to take medication to make your brain work properly in the morning. So there's and that's a experience that's true for me. I want to note that not everybody who has ADHD or neurodiversity does take medication or choose to take medication, but that neurodiversity is something separate, something distinct, and should be understood and celebrated as such, because I may struggle to pay attention in the meeting, but you can be sure I will lose myself in that spreadsheet for 6 hours and generate the best database you've ever seen, because I love it. I'm going to move on now to another question for all of us. I'm just going to have a little bit of a look. One topic we have talked a little bit about this evening that I do want to sort of bring back to, which was a question that was submitted via Zoom. Why do you think we see so little by, for, and about asexuals and asexuality out in the quote unquote real world, i.e. not online? Yeah.
I'll pass this off to the other guys.
Should have called us the aces.
We're pretty ace.
This one's a really big one. And I mean, there's a lot of, I guess, sexualization in media, and that there's a whole load of nuance that I'm not going to get into here. I feel like there was almost maybe more representation potentially in the 80s. A lot of 80s media that I've seen has mentioned like asexual people and never really seen them as a problem, which is weird because, you know, the second you're not allosexual these days, a lot of people are like, like, what? You don't, you know, you don't have crushes necessarily or XYZ. So I think that definitely comes into it. I guess a lot of it's also a lot of that privilege, a lot of that white Anglo sort of approach of sexuality is this and romantic identity is this. And it's incredibly racist and it's incredibly, well, acephobic and aerophobic. But it's so pervasive. And I'm not going into detail because it's so, I guess, broad, and it's hard to pin down exactly. But Giancarlo, I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that.
Mine's much more simpler. I obviously agree with everything Jay has said already, but my message is a bit simpler. Like it's sexuality is a spectrum. Like I know that sounds so cliche because it is, but like a lot of things in our community is a spectrum, and I've experienced the spectrum. Like, you know, again, kind of like Ezra, like identified as gay at first because that was something that's all I really knew at first. But you know, but then there's been that journey from that part of the selection to where I am now. And interspersed in that story has been, you know, experiences with complex trauma, being a survivor, being all these different things that has impacted how I experience sexuality and how I express sexuality. I want to just capture on that point of expression because expression is a choice. Your experience isn't a choice. And so I have found a lot of power in being, in finding that expression in my control. And so that for me is where I've landed where I am now with my experience of my sexuality being one of as a demisexual, because it's the way I experience my sexuality in a safe way, considering the complex trauma and being a survivor issue that I've got. And that's because it's a spectrum. And that's all it is.
Amen. Both of you so well put. As you've noticed, it's a really complex question to unpack. And we could definitely go all night about this. I do want to flag that there was an event at Free Sexuality where my face also featured, funnily enough. I think a month or two back. I believe it was. Time is not a thing, but the video is up on our Facebook page, and we encourage you to go and have a little watch. It was definitely really, really informative, and it's a conversation that we'd love to continue having at our events. I'm going to keep asking a few more questions. I'm conscious that it's potentially getting late for a few people. It is getting up to 9:30 here in Victoria, which I believe is 6:30 in Western Australia. I'm keen to continue having a little bit more of a conversation for a little bit longer if our panelists are, but for anyone attending, please don't feel that you have to hang around if you have other priorities, needs, wants, desires, up to and including sleep and things like that. Please take care of yourselves, prioritize your well-being and your needs, and don't feel social pressure to hang around with us. We reject social pressure and we celebrate individual choice. So a couple of more questions for us. Is there a particular person or organization whose visibility gave you hope when you were younger or inspired you to come out? Is there a person or organization that you still look to today? And I'm going to come to you first, Alicia, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's okay. For me, it took quite a long time to like find that representation, because I was very much the same as yourself, where when I was younger, I was like, I must be a lesbian. That's exactly what I am. That's the word that I know. Therefore, that is what I am. So I very much did that. That's because it was the only word that I knew. And when I mean it was the only word I knew, it was the word I was getting called at school by bullies. So it's like I was like, oh, I figured out that word. But in their defense, those bullies were spot on. They were quite right for a little bit, and then I found out what other words meant. Right. So for me, because I loved comedy so much, because there was never like lesbians on TV when I was like watching TV and stuff. Because I was only watching like certain amounts of like, like I wasn't watching like the only other thing that would have been was Ellen. We're not allowed to talk about Ellen anymore. Sorry, I'll put a page on the end of it next time. But yeah, so for me, it was comedians, like mostly Hannah Gadsby, because it would be like the Australian comedy gala that would be on Channel 10 every year. And I was a kid, so what I would do is I would like record it on a VHS and just analyze it. And then I just loved specifically the more flamboyant and like gay and queer comics. So there was like Hannah Gadsby, Deanne Smith, Tom Ballard, Josh Thomas. These were like, for me at the time when I was like watching all these comedy and like analyzing it, they were on there just expressing themselves and just talking to a large room of people about what they are. So for me, I just immediately identified with that. And then obviously, like as I got older, I was able to find, new things, and like I was able to really do my own research. But for when I was younger, it was definitely like queer and like lesbian and gay comics on Channel 10 was my thing. They what helped me.
Thank you so much. And again, so much of what you just said resonated with me. I know that for me, it wasn't looking at specific people growing up, but it was tying into the subtext of literature or works on screen and in books. I loved the Trill in Star Trek growing up because they sometimes changed genders with the symbiont things, and also they were super capable because they had this like 700-year-old thing in them that got rid of any kind of potential inattention or something. There's a psychology session or two in that one. But yes, I think we draw so much into subtext as diverse and queer people because that's what gets us through. That's what informs us. Because I liked Troye Sivan. I still do. I've got his music, but I don't identify with what Troye Sivan identifies as and presents as, because that's not me. Still love his music. Just to be clear, I know he's from Western Australia and a great Western Australian, so huge fan. But again, the subtext. Sorry, GC and MJ, feel free to jump in, please.
Jump in.
Want to go first, MJ?
No, you go first this time.
Okay. I was just gonna say I don't know if I have one. Like I said earlier, that I haven't really found the role model. The validative role models wasn't there when I needed it, and I don't know if it still is. But what I am finding really inspiring and it has helped me recently. My acceptance of my identity has been the sheer confidence and desire to be seen by people who are disabled and people of colour. Like there's been a huge movement of those communities coming out in force to celebrate who they are unabashedly and without restraint. I don't always agree with everything that people are saying, but the fact that they're doing so and using their voice to make sure they're being heard is inspiring, and it's given me the confidence to explore things I haven't wanted to for a long, long time, whether it be my cultural heritage, whether it be my own disability, and that allows me to be confident and say these things today. I wouldn't have said I proudly identify as being someone of Philippine heritage 15 years ago in high school. I would have tried to pretend like I was white passing as much as possible and take pride in the fact that I wasn't like the other Asians when the other kids at school say you don't like them. Like that shit is not on. But because the fact that we have people from communities of colour and people from people with disabilities coming out, wanting to be seen and heard. That's inspired me to accept that. Sorry, partner again. I must really preface it. I have, but
I guess I'll round this out really quickly by saying no. There wasn't really anything that I got exposed to. Maybe there was some representation out there, but I never got to see it. So for reference, I grew up in, I guess, middle class, white suburbia, thinking I was a cis guy, and being trans, or the feelings that I had that I later, recognized as constituting my transness, was, as has been the case for a lot of other trans people, the only outlet being like pornography. And because that's about all the representation we had, I think maybe I'd seen 2 magazine covers with representation of trans women. And of course they used slurs on them. But it's been that long ago. I'm like, did I even get that representation? And so my experience sort of took place as an unhealthy fetishization because there wasn't anyone to represent me. And, when we talk about the privilege that I've just described, imagine how much more difficult that is in so many other spaces, because yikes, honestly. But in later years, groups like Transfolk of WA have come around. Really great group. We've also got, obviously Out for Australia, and all these other bodies now exist, and that's fantastic. And I just hope that we're never, as a society, in the same place we were 10 years ago with no representation and calling everything gay, and that being the big slur of the time. Because, 2009, 2010, that was half the punchlines were gay, just the word gay. And I think it's really important that we never hit that low point again, because that was a better point than what was in the 1980s, the 1990s. And it was still so harmful and led to me exhibiting a lot of toxic behavior. So I think this representation has to stay, and it has to be done well.
Amen. Thank you both. And again, it's so much that resonated. I think one of the threads that comes through is that for pretty much all of us growing up, we didn't see ourselves represented, or at least represented in any kind of healthy way. But I think now we're seeing that change in at least our spaces, and that's the sort of the one major benefit of the 21st century so far, perhaps, is that is changing. I am conscious of time, and I'm also conscious that Nick, our wonderful Auslan interpreter, has been signing for over an hour. And thank you so much to Mizia in the chat for pointing that out to us. We are very conscious that we don't want to keep Nick working longer than is fair or reasonable. So with that in mind, just to address to Nick directly, please feel free to take a break if you need to. We don't want to overburden you. Thank you so much. We'll probably only do 1 or 2 more questions just to round out the evening, as we're aware that people need to get on with their evenings. One question, I think, just to really tie things together, what tangible actions could the LGBT plus community, so the first 4 letters of our acronym, take to celebrate and support people that share your identity?
This is an easy one. Just educate yourself. So simple. We don't need Nick for this.
Prioritizing our voices, those of us who are the, after the first 4 letters, prioritizing our voices when you don't know the best answer. So if you're just the L or just the B or just the T, etc. If someone's got that intersection of identity, or if someone identifies with one of those other letters, don't be the person who speaks over them or tries to speak for them without, as Giancarlo said, educating yourself, but also like just make sure you've got everything together and make sure that you're the best person for the job, and try not to be the best person for the job. And by that, I mean, have someone who's better. Actively try to get someone who is in a better position to talk about these things or to take action in these spaces than you, and back them up, be their accomplice.
Yeah, that's really, really well said. I find, especially with being in the intersex community, I find people can still be quite could be quite like homophobic, even if they are LGBT. Sometimes I find that quite obvious and distinct, and sometimes like gay or lesbian people sometimes, or at least in my experience, feel that like they can't be offensive because they're in the community. So maybe what MJ said, definitely having like going to the right sources and maybe asking and getting your information from people who are, are those people, where a lot of the time I find, there's a lot of assumptions being made, definitely about genitalia and sex, and about, like it's quite ridiculous how many assumptions people make without any knowledge at all. The amount of LGBTQ people, like even LGBT people, that are surprised about the pluses, it just astonished me. And I know that I have a goal that I want to educate every single person in Australia about what the word intersex means. That's a massive goal I have, and I'm always going to have that goal. But I do sometimes feel quite insulted when other members of the LGBTQ community just don't want to try or don't know, because I feel like so much of us have fought for, like, it's not over. Like, it's not just because some people can marry a couple, like, since we got like so I'm getting like frazzled, so like since gay marriage, I found like we won that fight. We won that fight. It was amazing, but we did not win the war. Essentially, like, it's still going on, and there's still so much more to be done. And I find sometimes when I bring up the topic of intersex in my comedy shows, a lot of like my queer audience, or like just gay and lesbian audience, will be like, "Oh, we're fine though, aren't we?" I was like, "No, you don't even know. I have to tell you what it means. Obviously, we're not fine." Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Again, yes, the war is not over. We did win one battle, but that, which mattered to many people, and I want to acknowledge that marriage was a very significant gain for many people, but it is not everything. For those, I think, LGBT plus people who are our allies and working to support us, I just sort of riffing off that, I want to say this. We're not always in the room, and we don't always get to be in the room. I had an experience recently where my partner, who is a lawyer and on a working group with a advocacy group looking at construction industry standards and all of that, the question of bathrooms came up, and my partner asked me, is it okay that I'm being asked about gender diverse bathrooms? And I said, is there anyone non-binary on the panel? Anyone trans on the panel? No. Okay, then you, like, if you know enough, if you're educated and you've taken the time to educate yourself, which obviously my partner has, she loves me to bits, I hope, then yes, please speak up, because we don't always get to be in the room. And frankly, we'd rather have a friendly voice in the room than no voice at all, because we still need that progress. We still need that change. So yes, thank you all. That was beautifully put. I am going to, it's one of my passions. I will, I think, wrap us up with one final question, just because I'm conscious of the time. And this one ties back to sort of what OFA is all about. One of our key deliverables is the mentoring platform. As you may have heard, Mentor Loop. We encourage all of you to go and sign up as mentors, mentees, or both. And for all of the panelists here this evening, how has mentorship, either informal or formal, helped you to feel comfortable being yourself? And I would probably append that with particularly in the workplace, but also in general.
I'm happy to kick us off with that question. Yeah, mentoring is, I think the first thing I want to share about mentoring is that it's a two-way street, and when you recognise that, it really has the opportunity for you to grow, and in ways you don't expect, both professionally and personally. Mentoring requires you to be able to be self-aware and upfront with what you need. And so by doing that first, you actually get to open yourself up to the opportunity to be both a mentor and a mentee. My mentors and my mentees from all walks of life. So mentors don't necessarily need to be in the same position you want to be in 10 years' time, or the same industry that you're in. Sometimes you can learn from people you don't expect. Like, one of my best mentors has been someone who worked in the museums, like in museums for basically most of their career. I have no interest in becoming a CEO of a museum, but this person has a lot of experience in knowing how to with governance, and knowing how to be how to do financial statements, which is a skill they want to learn in my not-for-profit career. And so that's the kind of thing you need to be open to, but it requires you to be able to understand what it is you want first. And when you do that, the mentoring experience can really help you define and clarify what it is that you want to do with your career.
Awesome. Thank you, Giancarlo. Oh, sorry, MJ, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, finding that sort of mentor who empowers you and focuses on that empowerment, finding an expert in their own right, finding someone who knows their things, and I guess having that back and forth, because it can be just about having someone else there who can pick up on your strengths and empower you to deliver things, whether those be workshops, whether those be improving upon yourself and going for that job, or becoming a stronger advocate. It's fantastic to have that person who can bring that out of you and is focused on that. And that could be a half-hour session once, or it could be, an ongoing series. But being able to have someone who can pick those things out of you in a safe environment is, I think, something we'd all quite like. And so I highly encourage y'all to get in on being a mentee, if you can. Yeah, words are difficult. I don't know how y'all are managing it. It's only 6:50 here.
Both of you guys have made some really amazing points, and honestly, I can't add a lot to it. You guys have pretty much touched on everything. Yeah, I have not got a lot to add. I definitely like the being having someone to talk to. Would recommend. Counseling's great. Everyone should go to that. Everyone should. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you all. I would sort of add in as my 10 cents at the end of this that in terms of finding a mentoring relationship, on either end of that particular relationship dynamic, connection is really, really important. I was incredibly lucky a few months ago to get some mentoring while on secondment from someone who was a close friend of mine who became my manager for 4 weeks and flipped the lid on my narrative about what I was capable of in the workplace, and pointed out that I was actually quite good at my job, which I was pleasantly surprised by because I thought I kind of sucked. So that was really, really positive. Having someone outside the 9 to 5 who doesn't have to sign off on your report card is a really, really powerful way, particularly in the workplace, of realizing your value. Because at the end of the day, we all work at some kind of, production line. That's the nature of the beast. And seeing an outside perspective on that and the value that you add is incredibly powerful. and reinforcing the value that your identity brings as well, because each of us hold our own identities, we bring our own unique experiences, and I can think of things that the straight white cis man in my team cannot, and I'm great at it. With that, I think it's probably about time that we wrap up for the evening. Thank you all so much for attending. Thank you to Nick, who did the Auslan interpretation this evening, who has stepped away for a much needed and well-deserved break. Thank you to all our panelists. You have been amazing. I have been inspired. I have been noting to my partner over Facebook that I wish this event was in person, because I would so love to go out for a drink with all of you or something afterwards, be it hot chocolate or something stronger, because this has been incredible. Thank you so much to the WA team, Alana and Jenna, for organizing this. Thank you to our support team. Wenjui in particular, I want to give a shout out to, who's been running the Zoom this evening and delivering an amazing platform, as always, looking very slick, and also on Facebook for those tuning in on Facebook. And thank you obviously to OFA, a little bit of a self-promotion plug there for putting this on and giving us the space to do this. Finally, when the event is ended, for those on Zoom, you will be pushed to a survey. Pretty please fill it out. We love hearing about how we went. We love having data, because data is amazing to tell us how we went, and it helps inform future events, future experiences, and how we engage with you as an audience. So thank you all so much for coming along. Please stick around, fill out the survey, and we look forward to seeing you at another event soon. Thank you all.